Welcome to part 2 of the planter video lessons. We assembled our planter parts and let them set up so that those seams could bond together. So I'm going to uncover it now. I had two layers of plastic covering this up. I've let this sit overnight so these two pieces could bond together. The next step is to clean up the bottom, and that requires flipping our planter over. So that's why I like to make sure my seams are set first. The easiest way for me that I found to flip this over is to put a second board on top and just flip the whole thing. If I try lifting it with my hands, it can flex and put pressure on those seams. And this is the best way I've found to flip it without putting too much excess stress on those seams. So I'm just going to slide one hand underneath, keep one hand on top, and just flip it over. And then I can take the top board off and work on cleaning up the bottom. This particular one, I'm going to go ahead and paddle the edges down and kind of leave a really rough organic line on this one. So I just want to show you a couple different options. You can paddle this with a wooden spoon around your kitchen, like a paint stick, anything that you can find around. It's kind of fun actually to play with different types of paddles and get different marks. Here's a couple things that I have, and honestly, I'm not even sure what some of these are. They're things I found at the Goodwill. This was something from the Goodwill. I like to use this to paddle. It makes some interesting marks. I've got other types of paddles I'll show you in a minute, but I just like gently, I always sneak up on my clay. I don't want to come in and try and move all of the clay at once. So I very gently start tapping around the edges, and I'm going to go over this and over this until it starts to curve around and seal. So this is, again, putting more reinforcement. We're really sealing that seam, and it's going to slowly bend over and leave kind of a wavy line. And this is why it's fun to experiment with different paddles and see what kind of different marks you get. This is an old ping pong paddle, so sometimes I'll use this. It's a little bit bigger so you can cover bigger areas. Again, this is a Goodwill find, and I have no idea what it's intended for, but it's kind of fun. I can turn this on different sides and get some interesting marks. So once I get this sealed, I might turn this over and use the skinny edge to make some marks going up the side of this one. And this one is the only one I have that's actually a clay tool, not a Goodwill find. This is just from one of the clay supply stores and has slightly different curvatures on the two ends. So you can use something like this that's got a bit of a curve to it. Can help you get that edge bent over there. So we're just going to seal this up. So I've paddled all the way around the edges, and I've left this a raw organic line. It undulates up and down because when I cut this base out, I was loose with it. I wasn't super precise at all. The next two things that I want to do are, one, decide what kind of a hole, drain hole I want to cut in the bottom. And I am definitely not a plant expert, but if you know your plants and you know that you're going to use this for something that's more of a succulent, you might want a larger drain hole. If it's something that needs more water, you can put a smaller drain hole in. You can put multiple holes in if you want it to drain more evenly. So that's up to you, and I hope you know a little bit more about plants than I do. No big secrets with this. You can just use your a needle tool or a knife tool. They make hole punches. This is a hole punch. There's a variety of these at the clay store. If you end up doing something that requires a lot of holes that are exactly the same, but this does not need precision. It's going to be underneath the planter. Nobody's ever going to see it. So I'm just going to aim kind of straight for the center here, and get a bit of a hole, and I can refine this from both sides this way. I can get off the rough edges from the bottom side, and when we turn it back over, I can smooth it off and get rid of the rough edges on the top side. Just get our little circle out. Okay, so we have our hole, and I do want to go around the edges. Again, we never want to leave this sharp 90-degree cut line on there, because that will cut your fingers and it just doesn't look great. At this point, because my clay's firmed up, it's okay to use a bit of a sponge. So if it's easier, you can get a sponge and run a sponge around that to get off any sharp chunks of clay, any sharp edges. So we get that cleaned up. And then the last thing is I need to make a decision if I want to just leave this a plain undulating line or if I want to decorate this line with some texture. Now this one is the triangle one. It's the one that I've left plain. So I haven't added any texture to this yet. I'm going to put a face, kind of a Green Man style face on the front of it, but I haven't done anything else yet as far as surface work. So I'm going to go ahead and use this mystery tool and kind of go around and just make some lines here to decorate and accentuate the fact that this is a separate line down here. So I'm just going to paddle in some random lines. I'm going to kind of take turns, different directions and different sides. I'm going to use both ends of this and go around and just do some decorative work. So that adds some interesting texture to this attachment piece here. This style leaves the mark of the maker. It's telling the story about how the pot was made. So people can look and kind of see how it was put together and see that there was two separate pieces of clay. And this look isn't for everybody. So the next pot we're going to do, we'll do a little bit cleaner cut, blend it together. And so if your personal preference and style is more of an engineered precision look, you may prefer the other method. But if you like that kind of loose, organic, let the clay be clay, this is just a nice little way to leave that natural mark there. The last thing that I'm going to do before I flip it back over is just take a dull pencil and autograph this baby. If my clay is super wet, I'll lay a piece of plastic here and sign over the piece of plastic, but hopefully we're firm enough that this doesn't leave too many chunks of clay. The downside is if the clay is too wet, it leaves little balls of clay. And I am getting a little bit of the clay balling up here because even though I let this set up overnight, it's still a little bit wet there. The other thing is we're working with groggy clay. You really have to have some grog in your clay for this style. And also if you want it to hold up outside to use as a functional planter. So I'm just going to brush off a couple little balls of clay that balled up there. And we're going to flip this back over. Same thing that we did before. Just slide one hand underneath. Flip that over. And then we'll take a look at the oval shape one. The other method of securing the bottom is we're going to start the same way. We're going to put a board on here and flip this over so we can work on the bottom. But we'll make this one a little bit cleaner. So hand on both sides and just flip it over. We're going to start the same way. I'm going to paddle this edge. I like to do that just because it gives a good seal, but then we're going to go around with a knife and trim the excess off. So we'll make it a little bit more precise and engineered looking. So we're going to do the exact same thing by paddling. This time you'll notice I'm paddling more straight down. I'm not trying to bend the clay up the side because we're going to trim it off. So it's more an action of just straight down. Once I'm happy with the seal, I'm going to take my knife tool and puncture some holes for this to drain. Because this is a longer shape, an oval shape, I'm going to put 2 holes, one at each end. So hopefully it'll drain a little bit more evenly. But again, I'm sure you know more about plants than I do and what makes plants happy. So you can decide what kind of drain holes you want based on what you think you might want to be planting in your planter. Because I'm doing 2, I did these a little bit smaller than I did the last one. So just getting 2 holes, approximately the same size. And we're going to do the same thing. We're going to clean up the rough edges and autograph this, and then just flip it back over, and we'll talk about how to clean up this rim. Okay, I've paddled this, punctured 2 holes in, and autographed it. Now it's flipped back over and ready to trim this excess off. By the time I've paddled it, there's not a ton of excess sticking out here. I originally left about a 1/2 inch overhang, but by the time I added the coil inside and worked with it and then paddled it from the outside, there's not a ton to trim off. So I'm just gonna try and hold my knife straight up and down and run this straight all the way around, trimming off where there's any excess. I've trimmed the excess off. I'm going to flip it over one more time. And I'm going to paddle the edges just one last time. And all I'm doing now, and you don't even need to paddle it if you want to, you can just run your finger around. But again, we're getting rid of that sharp edge because I just cut this. It has a 90-degree angle here and it doesn't look good, and it's going to turn really sharp in the firing. So I'm going to paddle this and then smooth it off with my finger. And now I want to just blend this side in with my finger a little bit better and make sure that I can kind of erase all of the lines here, make sure it looks like it's one solid piece of clay. And again, we're just worried about it cracking back apart in the firing. If you lose some of your pattern down here where your finger has blended this, you can go back in and touch up the pattern. I'm not sure I even want to do that. I think I kind of like the way it just sort of like comes up gradually here. So for now, I'm just going to leave that kind of gradual look. I'm going to go in now and clean up just these inner holes a little bit. There's still a rough edge here. So I'm going to go in with my finger and a sponge and clean those up. And then I'm going to talk about 2 embellishments. I'm going to show you how to put handles on if you want to put on handles, and how to make a little hollow animal if you want to add a little hollow animal. We have this all cleaned up, and this is a perfectly acceptable planter. So if you want to stop here, that's great. You can lightly cover this, set it aside, and let it dry slowly and call it good. I want to show you a couple more options if you feel like embellishing it a little bit more. So for the oval one, I want to show you how to do some handles and how to do a little critter to set on the side if you want to. So for the handles, the quickest way to do handles is to roll out with some pretty soft clay, a coil, and you want the coil at least the length that you're going to want your handle. And what we're going to do is slide a skewer into this and make it a hollow tube and cut it in half so that half will go on this end and half will go on this end. So I roll out my coil. This is pretty soft clay. And then while I'm kind of rolling it, I hold the skewer steady at the same height. And I come in halfway from one end and then halfway from the other end. And then I'm going to roll this a little bit on the table with pressure downward. And what it does is this gives you a hollow tube. So this is a nice quick way to get yourself a hollow tube. And you can end up using this method for legs and arms and all kinds of sculptural pieces. So I'm coming in from the other end. The reason I do 2 ends is to hopefully avoid going off to the side, which happens a lot. That just kind of went off center there. So I'm going to come back in from this end and see if we can get this roughly to come out the other end. One of the challenges is that I mentioned before, whenever you're using wood and working with clay, over time that wood gets bent a little bit. As it gets wet, it tends to warp. So this skewer most likely is not super straight. And so that's why I come in from both ends and kind of finesse it back and forth to get it through. So we have clay on a skewer, and now I can roll, and I'm putting pressure downward, and that's going to give me a hollow tube. And if I want some kind of funky texture while it's on here, I can take like my handy dandy wooden knife tool, or you can take a ruler, anything you want, and you can start to roll in some textures on this. So let's go, let's go this direction. We'll give it some kind of twisty textures here. Hold this up a little bit so hopefully you can see that in the light. And again, you can be precise with this, or you can be loose and kind of run it back and forth in all different directions and just play around with different textures. You can leave it plain. You don't have to add textures. Let's see, I'm going to do one more spiral on here and gonna try to be a little bit loose with this. I don't want it too even. So I've got this one going at a different angle, so it's gonna kind of crisscross. And I think I'll do just one more layer here. An added benefit of putting in this texture, in addition to adding a little bit of interest, when we go to bend this and place it on there, these little lines in here actually make it easier to bend. Running out of table there, so I'm going to back up to finish this. But yeah, just having these tiny little texture cuts in here are actually make it easier to bend on there. Okay, so we have a hollow tube with some texture marks on it. And I'm going to take my knife and I'm literally going to cut this in half this way, and then we can apply it. So I'm going to come in, slicing it down the middle and trying to use the skewer as my stopping point. Then I'm going to take the skewer out, and then I want to line this up straight up and down as much as possible so that it comes out even, so both halves are even. Okay, so I have two halves, and then what's going to happen is I'm going to bend these around the rest of the way, and where it's open here, it's just going to pinch on to my pot. Another variation, if you prefer, for some handles is to take a couple of coils and roll them out pretty thin and then twist them together, and you can get a similar look as long as you make sure you roll the coils nice and thin so that when you twist them together it doesn't get too thick. And then you can attach, because there's two coils, you can attach one of the coils to the inside of your pot and one to the outside of your pot. So I've got my two coils, and if you just start to twist these together, and you need the clay to be pretty wet to do this or it cracks apart. And then you can roll it over and slip and score one coil to the inside and one coil to the outside of your planter. So something along the lines of this. This is probably way too long. I would probably trim that off and do something shorter. But that's a variation, that's a possibility for you too. Or again, just take a solid coil, decorate it, and then you can splice this. If you splice the coil and slip and score both sides, then you can also attach a solid coil on there once you've decorated it. So take your pick, be playful, think of something new and share your idea with us. And then I just like to go over the attachments with a wet paintbrush to make it nice and smooth. Make sure the seal is on there well, and wipe away any of that kind of slurry that we've built up. Make sure that's not sticking out. So this is just one method. Play around, do anything you want. If you'd like to add a little critter to the side of your planter, go ahead and cover your planter with plastic. We want to keep it moist while we work on our critter, and grab just a small amount of wet scraps. I'm going to start by making a pinch pot into a full circle and sealing it off. And I've rolled out a really thin piece of scraps here that I'm going to cut some pieces out of. I'll just do a stylized bird or owl kind of like little guy, and we'll add him to the side here. So this is a small piece of soft clay. I'm making a pinch pot by putting my thumb in. So I'm pushing my thumb in, and then I'm squeezing towards the outside and turning it. So I'm squeezing, rotating, squeezing, rotating. And each layer, I'm moving my thumb up, and I'm trying to make this into a sphere and create an even thickness throughout my sphere. And then as I come to the top, I'm actually going to pinch it back in and try and close this and seal it back together. And I like to work on this sealed sphere form because it's actually a pretty strong form. Once we seal it up and it has a little air pocket in there, you can paddle it and shape it and add things to it, embellish it, decorate it, and it's a really strong form. So I'll hold this up. So this is about the size of my pinch pot, and now I'm pinching it in. And you can either just continue to pinch this in and join it and blend it and make a little sphere. If you feel like you don't have enough clay and you wanted your little critter to be a little bit bigger, you can add coils. I'll grab some wet clay and show you here. You can just add some small, really, you want pretty thin coils, and coil that inward. And then blend that really well. So you can kind of coil that. Take again the rounded end of my wooden knife tool and blend that coil. Okay, once I have it sealed, now I mentioned how strong this is. You can like roll it on the table to get a different shape. You can paddle it, smooth it off. Play around with that and get any kind of shape that you want. And you can use this as the body of a squirrel, a pig, really. You can go a lot of different directions on this. I'm just smoothing, I'm looking for any cracks. I don't want it to crack in the firing, so I'm making sure that end where I coiled it in, I'm just making sure that I got it sealed well enough and it's not going to crack apart. And then right before we attach this, we will put a hole back in it so that we can let the air release while it's firing so it doesn't blow up. But for now, it's stronger to work with it all sealed. So I have the body. I'm going to call this a bird or owl. So he's going to sit like this. And we're just going to play around with some shapes here and stylize him a little bit. I am going to grab my toothbrush again because I have this really thin material. I'm going to make a triangle to attach right there. So I'm going to make this rounded, and then I want it to come down into like a nose kind of shape. But I want to use my toothbrush to attach this. So I'm doing this kind of shape, just a kind of funky triangle. Here we go, toothbrush. All right, dipping my toothbrush in a little bit of water, scoring the back with a wet toothbrush, and I'm gonna lay this on here, and I'm gonna apply pressure in the middle first, right here, and work my way outward. And I do that to make sure that I'm not trapping any air pockets under there. We don't want to trap air. So you can see we kind of have a stylized little beak here. And we'll work on some funky little eyeballs. I'm gonna go ahead and blend this top line. That doesn't need to read as a line. So I'm gonna blend that in. All right, so there's our beak. And be playful with these. We're just stylizing the idea of a little critter here. I think I've got this funky little flower stamp I'm gonna use and make some flower eyes here. They're kind of like daisies, so we'll just see what that looks like. So this is a little tool that you can get at the ceramics store, the supply shop, that will cut out little tiny pieces. So if you're in a hurry, you can find something just to cut out, or you can hand cut out a couple of different pieces. So we're gonna do the same thing here. I'm gonna use my toothbrush, dip it in water, and score the back here. Get our little flower eyeball on there. And these are still super wet, so I can slide them around a little bit if they're not lined up. But I'm kind of going for just silly, funky anyway, so I'm not sure I even care if they're lined up. Certainly not going for perfection here. Okay, so we've got some eyeballs. I'll take the end of a paintbrush here and make like a pupil in the middle of the flowers there. Okay, so we've got that much. And then I'm just gonna make some like the idea of feather marks. And you can use the pointy end of the wooden knife tool to give kind of an indication of some feathers down here. Don't want that too wet. It's still got quite a bit of water on there from attaching the beak and eyes. So that's just kind of a silly idea of a bird. I think I'll cut out some little wings here. And the wings are kind of just like a little leaf shape. So similar to cutting out a tiny leaf. And to make sure they're the same size, this is kind of the shape I have, I'm just going to lay that little wing down and trace around it so that the two wings come out roughly the same size. And same thing, dip my toothbrush in water, score the back of my little wing here, and then you can position him however you want. So kind of got a resting wing there, and flip this over, same thing, we're going to add a little bit of water, a little bit of scoring. So we've got some wings added on there, silly little eyes, silly little beak. And then we're going to slip and score the bottom and attach it to the side. And just to help it stay on there a little bit, I roll really, really, really tiny coils, and I'm going to squeeze them in there and make it look like little feet. So I'm going to squeeze it in and attach it, and then I can go in with my wooden knife tool and draw little lines to make it look like his actual foot is clinched onto the side of the plant. I'm going to use my wooden knife tool, and I'm going to mark a crease in the bottom where I want him to sit. Make sure that lines up. I'm going to set him right over here. And so I'm just pushing gently to make a bit of an indentation where the wall of the planter can slide up into. And I'm going to score this a little bit. And I'm going to score the top edge of the planter where he's going to sit. And I'm going to take my needle tool and I'm going to punch a little hole here. I'm going in just under the wing where it's not going to be visible, but it's enough for air to escape so that he doesn't explode in the kiln. That's not fun. And give him 2 holes there, 1 on each side. And we're going to just work him right in there. Okay, that's about where I want him. So I'm going to take a couple little lugs of clay, it's really tiny, and I'm going to slip and score those and set those up right in there. And then we'll draw some lines and make him look like his feet. And then depending on if I feel like he's stable enough, that might be plenty. He's resting on the handle too, so that gives him some extra support. But if I feel like he's not stable enough, sometimes I will add a tiny coil on the back side. Okay, so that's kind of the indication of some little feet. And I go in here with this wooden knife tool and make some marks. Kind of give the idea of some feet hanging on there. Try and get this up closer. So there's our little owl setting on the planter. I'm going to cover this loosely and let it dry slowly for a couple days, and then it's ready to go.